Peace Mom, A Mother's Journey Through Heartache to Activism. Cindy Sheehan, what do you hope to accomplish?
With my book or with my mission? Both? Well, of course I want the troops to come home from Iraq.
Is that number one priority?
Number one priority. Every day I get up and I think, what could I do? What's the best use of my time to accomplish that goal? But after our troops come home, we have to make sure that this never happens again. You know, our country forgot the lessons of Vietnam, and I'm here to make sure that they never forget the lessons of Iraq and my son's sacrifice.
So how is it that, in your view, that we should not do this again? How do you prevent that?
Well, our country is run by the military-industrial complex that Dwight Eisenhower warned us of, you know, when he left office. And we just have to educate our citizenry that most of the time our children are dying for the war machine, to line people's pockets, to not to defend America. Like my son joined to give something back to his community and his country, not to die in a country thousands of miles away for Exxon, Halliburton, Standard Oil, Bechtel. And we have to educate people that not to give our children to the war machine to die for profit.
When did you first become politically active in your life?
After my son was killed.
No politics before then?
Well, I was, of course, voted, but I never was demonstrated or wrote a letter to the editor or to Congress. Unfortunately, you know, it took my son's death to get me motivated.
What were you doing prior to Casey's death?
I was a soccer mom. I have 4 kids, you know. My life revolved around my children. I worked various jobs. The longest job I had was youth minister at St. Mary's Catholic Church, and my children were involved in the ministry, so that was really good.
And where was that?
Vacaville, California.
And when you say your children were involved in the ministry, what does that mean? Your children were active at the time?
They were in the ministry, they were in the leadership team, they worked at Mass. You know, I was in charge of the youth liturgy, and my children were altar servers and lectors and Eucharistic ministers, and they were just, you know, involved in the ministry with me.
In your book, you write that the Sheehan family has died and that there is a new Sheehan family.
Right.
What is that new family?
Well, of course, we used to be a family of 6. We did everything together. We would go out to dinner together. If we wanted to go get an ice cream, we would all pile in the van and go together. Any performances our kids were in, the whole family would go to their concerts, their plays, or whatever, you know. And now we are a family of 5. One of our valuable members is missing, but our whole way of being a family changed after Casey died. We had to redefine our roles. My children had to redefine their roles, and you know, I had to go from being my children trying to get me through this grief to me now being able to be strong enough to help my children get through this grief. And then, of course, my husband of 28 years and I are divorced now.
And that's Pat?
Yes.
And how often do you talk to him, if at all?
We usually right now talk through the children, but once in a while we talk.
Why? Why did you divorce?
Well, mostly it was because of Casey's death. There's statistics as high as 75% of families who bury a child, they end this way. But it's also a different way of grieving. I took my grief public, where he wanted to, you know, just try and deal with it and try to get back to some kind of normal life, when I realized that we can't go back to a normal life. You know, never again will our lives be like they were April 3rd of 2004.
How do you get from Casey's death to meeting Hugo Chavez and speaking at a peace forum in Venezuela?
Well, there was a lot of steps in between. And, you know, I've met Hugo Chavez, I've met the Foreign Minister of Ireland, the Vice President of Spain, many parliamentarians all over the world. I was welcomed to Australia by their Attorney General. So I've met many world leaders and many politicians in our own country, senators, Congress people.
Well, we've got the phone lines open. As you can see, they are all lit up, so let's take some phone calls from across the country. First call up is New Britain, Connecticut, on our Democrats line. Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
I'm just wanted to say to Mrs. Sheehan how my heart just goes out to you so much. I remember when we were going to bomb Iraq in the first place, how I got this terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I said, I have 3 sons, and I'm so glad that none of them are going to be involved in this horrible war. I knew from the very minute that it was a horrible war. And I'm telling you, I cry almost every day when I see those names of those kids. I just can't tell you how it makes me feel. And I pray for you, and good luck.
Well, thank you so much. It is shocking and awful on that day. Just was so heartbreaking. And I recently read that at least 10,000 innocent Iraqis were killed on that day of shock and awe in Baghdad. And now our casualties in Iraq have surpassed 9/11. And my question is, when is enough killing enough? When have we avenged the other deaths, and when is the cycle of violence going to stop?
Now, in here you write that you were also opposed to going into Afghanistan, correct? Right. Why?
Well, I think it should have been more of a special forces thing, going after Osama bin Laden, then invading a country and killing innocent people. I just am so, my question is, why do innocent people have to be targeted and killed in these? I believe 9/11 was a criminal act. And I believe we should have gone after the person who perpetrated the crime, not an innocent population.
Atlanta, good morning, on our Support President Bush line. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm just calling because I'm in support of President Bush because of the simple fact every mother does not want her children to be put in harm's way, but at the same time we must realize that the war is not pretty. There will be casualties. There will be things that are difficult to deal with war. But the reason why I support President Bush, and I'm a military veteran myself, is because he won't allow this enemy to have any kind of hope that they can retaliate on us. We must finish this enemy off, complete the task, because if we don't, we talk about casualties now, we're going to have some serious casualties on U.S. soil if we don't defeat them in their strongholds where they are.
Well, I'd just like to point the caller to the article in the New York Times yesterday where the CIA's national intelligence estimate said that this war in Iraq has increased Islamic jihadism and has not made the world safer. And why do we have to kill tens of thousands of innocent Iraqi men, women, and children for George Bush's war of terror? And it has been proven that it has not made the world a better place, and it is only increasing the people who hate America.
Next call for Cindy Sheehan comes from Cleveland on our independent line. Go ahead, Cleveland.
Thanks for taking my call. Ms. Sheehan, I give my condolences to you.
Thank you.
First. Second, the last caller is obviously brainwashed and been pre-programmed. My final statement to you is that, Mr. Sheehan, are you aware that the U.S. foreign government has a $10 million insurance policy on every soldier that loses his life? So they're going to make money whether they win, whether they die or fight.
Caller, where'd you get that information about the $10 million insurance policy?
I got it from a book by the name of a lady named Mary Croft, I think, and how she fight bureaucrats, on how to fight bureaucrats. I think her name is Mary Croft out of Canada. Mary Croft has done some extensive research on this information, and rather the soldiers fight, die, or win or lose, the U.S. foreign government has a $10 million insurance policy on every soldier in the military.
Thank you, caller. Cindy Sheehan, have you heard that before?
No, I absolutely wasn't aware of that. I'd like to check into it further.
And you touched this, and it's been in the news reports. Did you get a financial settlement after
Yes.
Casey's death?
Yes, actually it's their insurance policy that they take out, and also something that the government calls a death benefit. When Casey was first killed, it was $12,000, and then they increased it to $100,000, and it was retroactive. So we did get an increase of that. I used most of that money that I got from my son's death for my activism.
And to buy some property in Crawford, correct?
Right.
How far from President Bush's ranch is your
It's about
property?
8 miles.
About 8 miles.
Right.
How many acres?
It's 5 acres.
5 acres. And do you plan on building down there?
We already are checking into permits. We're building a lodge for our future Camp Casey's, and we're also going to have the Camp Casey Peace Institute, and we're opening up Camp Casey to soldiers from Fort Hood, you know, whether they support the war or not, just to come out to Camp Casey on the weekends, maybe to just relax. We're going to have a full-time mom there to take care of the soldiers, to pamper them because they're far away from home. And I know Casey would have enjoyed a place like that.
And Casey does appear on the front cover of your new book, Peace
Yes.
Mom. There's his picture. Annapolis, Maryland. Go ahead.
Yes, this is a comment for Ms. Sheehan, and the only thing that she said as far as being a criminal act, if that's the case, she can just go ahead and, you know, find whoever with enough probable cause, make an arrest, charge him with over, you know, thousands of counts of murder. Anytime a country is attacked in its own territory, it definitely becomes a matter of national defense. I was ignorant.
You know, I obviously don't agree with the caller. It wasn't an act of war because it wasn't one country against another country. And if it was an act of war, why did our Congress not declare war against Afghanistan or Iraq? Why did George Bush just take the authority upon himself? Wars are between countries, not between ideologies. And that's what we are doing. We're fighting a war against an ideology which we have proven has never worked and never been successful.
Do you find that you get strong reactions from people on both sides?
I find that the reactions that I'm getting from people who still support George Bush, they're getting a little more vehement, but the occurrence is getting less and less frequent. Just going through the airport yesterday, had so many people signing autographs. People giving me shows of support and hugs, and the people here in Washington, D.C. are always very supportive. And but as it gets less and less, I think it gets more condensed and more hateful. You know, the calls so far have been respectful, but I've gotten death threats. I've been called names that you wouldn't even believe, that these people that claim they're Christians could even know these words. And, you know, so it does get a little more vehement.
Are you still a Catholic?
No.
A lot of four-letter words in this book.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I use 4-letter words,
Why?
and they come from my heart. Yeah.
Next call for Cindy Sheehan comes from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go ahead.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
I just want to tell you that I've watched you for a long time and got online and read some of the stuff, and I just want to tell you how sorry I am of
Thank
all
you.
the attacks that have come on you from the right side. I mean, oh my God, I couldn't believe the vile, you know, dirty stuff that has been thrown at you and I truly believe in everything you say and everything you're fighting for, and if it was my child, I would have been doing the same thing. I watched this whole war unfold and have been watching George Bush ever since he took office, and the moment he said WMDs, I knew it was a lie. I knew the whole war was a lie. And when we dropped Afghanistan like a hot potato
Right.
and went into Iraq, I was so upset. And I knew that it was all lies. And I guess I just want to tell you, Cindy, that little by little the truth is coming out. And like you said, there's less people, you know, people are slowly learning the truth. Eventually it will come out, and people will know that you were right. But it will take time, and I just want you to keep that in mind and keep the faith and keep your head up, and because you are right, and I know you're right.
Thank you, caller. We got the point. Cindy Sheehan, if people want to donate to Gold Star Families for Peace, can they?
Yes, they can go to www.gsfp.org.
And we'll put that on the screen as we take this next call from Billerica, Massachusetts. Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Hello, Ms. Sheehan. I'd
Hello.
like to apologize for your son's death. I am for the war, but I completely support your opinion and your right to stand up and voice your opinion.
Thank you so
So
much.
good for you. I'd just like to say when you said earlier that wars can't happen between ideologies, they can. If you look at the Crusades, that's exactly what happened there. I'm not saying that I should condone it, but I am saying they can happen, and even if the other side, like us, aren't participating and calling it a war, they still may believe it. I understand that there's a lot more terrorists created today because of Iraq and because of situations, but we have to also look at the other side, that you don't take out the terrorists and the ideology by taking out their numbers. You take them out by taking out their bank accounts. When you freeze their bank accounts and take out sponsors that give them tons of money, that cuts their ability to plan huge operations. Now, like saying this is all we need to go into every country that does this, I'm just saying that this is like a reason why we would do that. And the only other thing, last thing I'd like to say is that a lot of liberals, I understand, I completely respect your view, that I understand why you hate George Bush, and there's a lot of things that he's done wrong, but at the same time, if he's gone and Republicans are out of office, these people are going to come back and get us because they hate liberal America more than us. They hate, no, think of it, they hate women's rights, they hate what the liberals like to stand up for. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the call. Thank you for being so respectful of my right to my opinion, and I believe you have your right to your opinion too. But we have to realize that when we were attacked on our soil, the worst attack on American soil, a Republican was in office. And George Bush, on August 6, 2001, was handed a presidential daily briefing that said, bin Laden determined to strike in the United States. And he did nothing about it. And according to Ron Susskind in his book, George Bush told the CIA agent, well, you've covered your ass now. So George Bush is not interested in protecting America. I didn't say that there can't be war between ideologies. I say that they're not effective, and innocent people die in these wars. And another misconception out there is that I hate George Bush. I don't hate George Bush. I don't hate anybody. Hatred only harms the person who hates. The person that is hated doesn't even know or doesn't even care. And I refuse to go into anything where hate is discussed. And I believe that we have to fight hate with love and violence with peace. And freezing bank accounts of terrorists would be great, but killing innocent people only increases our vulnerability here in America and around the world.
On the front page of the Washington Post this morning is this story. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. For Bush, war anguish expressed privately. It's Peter Baker's story. And in this story it talks about President Bush meeting with Hildy Halley, who is a self-described liberal anti-war activist, met with President Bush in Maine last month and said she believes he felt her grief. It wasn't just a crocodile tear. I felt like I moved him. I don't think he's going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh my gosh, I've been wrong this whole time and I'm going to change all my policies because of my meeting with this woman. I just hope that with each soldier he remembers my pain. You're quoted in this article. You disagree.
Well, he was also, from my own experience, I disagree when we met with him, but he was also on Wolf Blitzer, and he said the deaths in Iraq will, in the future or in history, just be a comma. My son was not a comma. My son was a three-dimensional living person who loved his family, he loved animals, he loved our pets, he wanted to get married, he wanted to be an elementary school teacher, he wanted to be a deacon in the Catholic Church, he wanted to have his own family. He was a living, breathing person with hopes and dreams. He wasn't a comma. And
what about your other three children? What are they doing?
My oldest daughter is in a university in California, and my son is a surveyor's apprentice, and my son Andy and my daughter Carly is the student, and my daughter Jane just finished massage therapy school, and she's a massage therapist.
And are you close to those three children?
I recently just rented a house in California near their dad with my two daughters, and my son lives with his dad, so now when I'm in California I can be even closer to them.
And you talk about your house in Berkeley in this book also. Do you have a place in Berkeley?
Well, I was living in Berkeley with some other peace activists. They were letting me live in an apartment for free. It's about an hour away from where my kids live, so I decided to rent something closer so we could be closer.
Macon, Georgia. You're on the air with Cindy Sheehan. Go ahead.
Yes. Cindy, of course, you have my sympathy for the loss of your son. I was there. I know what he went through. I know what the other troops are going through. The only problem I have with what you're saying is the fact that it keeps being repeated that we're killing tens of thousands of innocent Iraqis. And having been there, I'd like to set something straight there. We're not killing tens of thousands of innocent Iraqis. They're killing each other. They were doing it before we got there, and they'll be doing it after we leave. As you, I want all the troops home. I want them home soon. And I wish you the best.
Well, however they're being killed, we know that the assaults on Fallujah and Ramadi and Samarra, the American assaults killed many innocent people. Shock and awe killed many innocent people. Sectarian violence is killing innocent people. Lack of medicine, lack of doctors, lack of clean water and food is also killing innocent people, but they are a direct result of the occupation.
Who are your heroes up here in Congress?
Oh, I have so many. Dennis Kucinich, John Conyers, Maxine Waters, Lynn Woolsey, Ron Paul, Walter Jones, Chuck Hagel, Russ Feingold. There's so many that are standing up and who have always been against this. But I really admire the ones like Walter Jones who supported it at first and apologized to me for his support and believing the lies. And I think he really believed that Iraq was a threat to the United States and has found out since that they weren't.
Lady Smith, Virginia, go ahead.
Good morning. I have a daughter buried at Arlington Cemetery under the Clinton administration, and I never blame President Clinton for my daughter's death. She signed the papers to go in the military on her own. My second son was in the military, and when he came out, and when you started your peace march, or whatever you like to call it, I asked him what he would think if I did something like that. And he told me that he felt that it would just be against him and his dead sister. I'm raising 2 children that my daughter had, and we never know where these things are going to end. But as a religious person, you have to know that God knows when your child is coming home, and you have no choice of where it happens or when it happens. Thank you.
First of all, I'm so sorry for your daughter's death and your family's grief and pain. I know exactly where you are and what you're going through. Of course, our children signed up for the military, and that's how a lot of people, and really how this administration also justifies their senseless deaths, is by saying they're all volunteer military. So it's okay to kill an all-volunteer military as opposed to ones that you draft. It makes it a little bit easier. I just want our leaders, and I'm against all war. I don't care if a Democrat starts the war or if a Republican starts the war. And if we look back in the century, most of the wars in our history, especially in the century, have been started by Democratic presidents. I don't think a war is a solution to any problem, that killing innocent people, killing our brave volunteers for lies and for deceptions is not a good use of their courage and their integrity. And I just hope that if we want to continue to have an all-volunteer military, is that we hold our leaders to the same standards that we hold our children to, that we hold our leaders to the standards of telling the truth and only taking our country to war when it's absolutely necessary to defend America. And Iraq has proven that it is not about defending America.
This book, Peace Mom, is published by Atria, which is a division of Simon & Schuster. Next call, Burlington, North Carolina. Go ahead.
Hello. Miss Sheehan, I admire you so much.
Thank you.
And I follow you when I know where you're going and what you're doing, and I just admire you. I'd feel the same way if it were my son, because it's all, this whole thing has been nothing but a bunch of lies.
Right.
Started by George Bush. And that is the truth, and I believe that, and I'm 88 years old, and I believe that as much as I believe that I'm sitting on this couch talking to you now. I admire you so much. Keep up the faith, and when you get to Crawford on those 8 acres, do everything you can to aggravate the heck out of him. Make him move. Thank you.
Well, apparently he doesn't spend that much time in Crawford anymore. This year, Camp Casey has spent more time in Crawford than George Bush has. And I just want to say that Crawford, Texas is really a beautiful place. I'm glad I own land there. The people in Crawford, if they're not with us, they're respectful towards us. They recognize our right to own land there and to be doing what we're doing. The people of Central Texas are amazingly hospitable, and the true Southern hospitality is down there. And my goal is not to aggravate George Bush. My goal really is to wake up America. And last year when we first went to Crawford, barely 50% of America believe that this war is wrong and were in opposition to George Bush. Now it's almost 2/3, so I don't feel so alone anymore. I don't feel so out front. I feel like I'm in the middle of a crowd. Now we just need to get those 65% out marching and showing their disapproval of this war and this government.
Who is Jody Evans?
Jody Evans is a founder of Code Pink. She's a very dear friend of mine. She showed up to Crawford, Texas last year on the Monday after I got there, and she stayed with me in the entire time. We become very close. She's become a very good supporter. She ran Jerry Brown's campaign for president. She was on his staff when he was governor of California. So she's just a very valuable friend and very valuable ally to have.
Do you have any remnants of your old life? Any old friends, any old connections? Has it all gone away?
I have, you know, tragically just one friend still in Solano County in California that was my friend before Casey was killed.
And why the change?
Well, my other friends support George Bush and his war, and when I started speaking out, it was almost like the entire town of Vacaville turned against me because it's very conservative.
Miami, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I have a question. Isn't it true that when a kid signs up for the to go to the Army, does it willingly? In other words, he just signs up because he wants to, not it's because it's a draft. The reason why I say this is, I feel bad when somebody dies, but the truth of the matter is when the kids sign up, they have to be willing to whatever the outcome is, and always in the Army, the outcome will be to go to war. The other question that I have is the relationship with Chavez. Chavez is against Bush, and we are tired to see how these new coming up communist is against Bush, but by being against Bush, he is against the Americans and against the American way. I would like the guest to comment about that. Thank you.
Well, I answered the question about my son volunteering. I already answered that question. And about Hugo Chavez, I don't think being against Bush is being against the American way, because I'm against Bush and I'm not against the American way. Being anti-Bush is not being anti-American. And I travel the world. I've traveled the world since last year. I've been in 11 different countries, and the anti-Bush sentiment is enormous. Some countries, it's 95% are against George Bush, but they're not against America. And we have to fight that. Being against our government or the people in power is essentially an American value. If we didn't fight the government of England back in the 1700s, we would still be British. So being against power and being a check and balance on our government is the responsibility of the citizen. And being anti-George Bush is not being anti-American. I love my country. I could leave and live somewhere else if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to fight for what our country really believes in. Our country does not believe in torture. Our country does not believe in preemptive wars on innocent citizens. Our country does not believe in draining the treasury to support these kind of acts. Our country does not believe in a leader who lies. Our country is not, those are not our values, and I want to stay here in America and fight for our values.
Next call for Cindy Sheehan, Bradenton, Florida. Go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Sheehan, thank you very much for appearing on the program and your sacrifice. I I was wondering if you had a problem with the leadership of this war and their reluctance to serve. And as I understand, Bush has about 11 relatives, nephews, nieces, children, whatever, that are of age to fight this honorable war, and yet not one has stepped forward. I'd appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Well, I have talked about that also extensively. My only just war theory is one that you're willing to send your own children or yourself to fight and die for. And if George Bush truly thinks this is a just war, then he should be encouraging his own daughters and his nieces and nephews to go over and fight it. And we know that he never showed up for his duty in the Alabama Air National Guard. Dick Cheney had other priorities during Vietnam, and I don't fault George Bush and Dick Cheney for getting out of going over to Vietnam. I think everybody should have done it, and I think our soldiers now, knowing that this is an illegal and immoral war, should refuse to go fight it too. What I have a problem with is when they became leaders, leading our children exactly into the same war as Vietnam, a quagmire that has no hope. There's no hope of winning. There's no military solution. And that's what I seriously have a problem. I don't want the twins to go to Iraq. I don't want anybody to go to Iraq. I don't want Bush to send his children. I want him to bring our children home.
Where were you raised?
Los Angeles County.
And what did your parents do?
My dad was an electrician. My mom was a housewife.
And you write a little bit about your father's death in here, and you refer to him as an abusive alcoholic.
Yes, my my family life growing up was not ideal. It was pretty dysfunctional.
And when did you get out of the house?
When I married my husband when I was 19.
And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a brother and a sister. My sister is very involved with me in my mission. She works for Gold Star Families for Peace, and she is almost constantly by my side.
Is she with you today?
She's not with me today. I just left her yesterday.
Augusta, Maine, go ahead.
First of all, let me just give my heartfelt sympathies and condolences to you, Ms. Sheehan, for your loss.
Thank you.
But please don't take my comments, in a negative way. Just please listen to me when I say, I understand that for prior to your son's death, you weren't involved politically at all. You were a soccer mom. And that's pretty apparent because earlier in your conversation, you alluded to the fact that the World Trade Center disaster happened on Republican watch. Well, if you had been paying attention in the early 90s, I'm a Persian Gulf veteran, and if you had been paying attention in the early 90s, an evil dictator by the name of Saddam Hussein attacked a neighboring country, Kuwait, innocent neighboring country, and killed many thousand people in the process. Over the 25 years that he was a leader, he killed 250,000 Iraqis. That averages out to 10,000 Iraqis a year. And in 1994, there was an attack on the World Trade Center. Had that been successful, that would have happened during a Democratic government, executive branch. So I'm sorry to tell you that a lot of your points are not on. And I think that you should do a little more homework because obviously the longevity of your experience and education is apparently small.
Well, actually, I also am a history major, so I didn't come into this completely ignorant of things. And the Saddam's invasion of Kuwait was encouraged by our ambassador. She was a woman, I forget her name. She had a meeting with Saddam. She said that if he invaded Kuwait, that the United States would not interfere. That's also a historical fact. And I am not for any violence, whether it's on a Democratic watch or a Republican watch. My only point is, in the 21st century, when are we going to stop using killing and violence to solve our problems? Our world is getting smaller. Our borders are becoming very obscure because of the nature of our communication capability. I'm not okay with our innocent brothers and sisters in Iraq being killed or Afghanistan. I'm not okay with our own children being killed. I'm not okay with killing no matter who's doing it. And I think that we have to become enlightened and quit being barbaric and thinking that killing is going to solve problems, and that killing innocent Arab Muslims is only making our problems worse, not better.
From page 229 of Peace Mom, I really think that as of this writing, George Bush is out of his mind and out of control. I hope by the time my book comes out that George Bush will have had to resign in disgrace or will have been impeached and removed from office by a Congress that finally grew some balls.
Mm-hmm.
Next call, Phoenix, go ahead.
Yes, I've called in numerous times on this subject of disarming Iraq. I find it really hard to believe that every single citizen running around there has a gun they can shoot out their window. Try to imagine what that would be like on my street. I know you want out. I lived through the Vietnam years and my teenage years, and I'm a baby boomer and more war. I want out. I want everybody in the street. But do you agree that moving our soldiers to the border and starting to disarm these people, if you don't have a badge of some sort, not military, not a policeman, that you should be carrying a gun around the streets of Iraq? Isn't it time to disarm these people?
The solution is very complex. I do believe that our soldiers need to be moved out to the borders and then redeployed back to their home bases as soon as possible. You know, we in America have the right to own and bear arms, and it was so many mistakes made. I take your point and I will reflect on it. I haven't thought about it, so I can't really answer it right now.
Have you ever thought about going to Iraq?
I would love to go to Iraq. I would love to be in the place that my son was killed, where he took his last breath.
Have you looked into that?
Right now, it's not very possible. The closest I've been is to Jordan, and my children aren't very supportive of me going to Iraq right now. They lost their brother. They don't want anything to happen to me at this point, but at some time I would love to go there. In Jordan, I met with many Iraqi people, parliamentarians, who outlined their plans for American withdrawal, and I think we should be listening to the people of Iraq because it is their country.
Johnson City, Tennessee, go ahead.
Good morning, Ms. Sheehan.
Good morning.
I'd first of all like to say I'm very proud to live in a country where someone like your son can be willing to go fight for and die for his country. And I'm sorry you lost your son, but thank you for raising someone with enough integrity to do such a thing.
Thank you.
But in response to your response to Bush's war against terrorism, I think that when those in Iraq that oppose the government of Iraq and our intended democracy there, when they oppose them as much as you oppose President Bush and don't go out and blow things up, when they actually use speech, as you are, to express your opinions against the government, that's when our job will be done in Iraq.
Any reaction?
No, I don't think so.
We'll move on to Santa Fe, New Mexico then. Go ahead, Santa Fe. You're on with Cindy Sheehan.
Hi, Mrs. Sheehan. This is Layla Tobel. I just wanted to call and say how much admiration I have for you.
Thank you.
And that I do think that you're a very, very intelligent woman, and not to ever think of what that guy had to ever say about that.
Right.
And I just want to say that being 26, I've been, firsthand in the voting stage, and I lived in Florida, and I never got to vote. I didn't get to vote, and I wanted to. I sent out out-of-state ballots, and my cousin was in the World Trade Center when it blew up, and she made it out, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing is that, as soon as something happens to our country, we're assumed to blame. But when we do something to another country, who do we blame? Nobody. They all blame us, but we're innocent. But I really think it's great what you're doing and standing up for our country, and I think that all Americans should be as strong as you.
You take on the mainstream media in Peace Mom. Why?
Well, I believe that the mainstream media, they're supposed to be the fourth estate. They're also supposed to be a check and balance on our government. And I don't think they did their job in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. They gave George Bush a free pass, and really until recently, he has and his administration have been getting a free pass from the mainstream media, who I think now are finally starting to question and starting to maybe investigate some of the lies and the deception. And our country can't exist without a free media that is skeptical and investigative of the government.
And you take on Anderson Cooper in your book. Why is that?
Well, I just didn't really take him on. I just reported what happened at Camp Casey last year. You know, I questioned Anderson once in an interview he did with me. I said, you know, why didn't you guys scrutinize the president as much as you're scrutinizing me? Why didn't you scrutinize what he said as much as you're scrutinizing what I have said? And then he came out to Camp Casey and basically did an attack piece on me.
And have you talked to him since?
No.
Next call for Casey was stationed where here in
He
America?
was at Fort Hood,
And the
Texas.
next call comes from Fort Hood. Go ahead. Whoops. Helps if I punch the button. Go ahead, Fort Hood.
Yes, good morning. I'm a military wife, and my husband is serving currently in Iraq. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about Casey and the kind of soldier he was. From what I understand, Casey wanted to be in the Army from the time he was a younger man, and you can clarify that for the listeners. And I also heard that he voluntarily re-enlisted, and he volunteered for the mission that he went that so tragically took his life. And I guess what I find a little disingenuous about you, Mrs. Sheehan, is that you never talk about that. You never acknowledge the fact that your son was a proud soldier and served very honorably. And I noticed on the show today that you talked about all the wonderful things about your son, about the things he wanted to do with his life. But again, I think what you need to do is you need to acknowledge the fact that he was where he wanted to be, that he served honorably, but that you disagree ultimately with what he was doing.
Okay, I'm glad you called because what you said is very false. Casey never wanted to be in the Army. He, in fact, resisted recruiters from the time he was 16. Finally, when he was 21, a recruiter got a hold of him. He had been in college for 3 years. The recruiter promised him a $20,000 signing bonus. He got $4,000 of that. He promised him a laptop so he could finish his education. He never got that. He promised him that he could finish college in the Army. They would never let him take a class. They promised him that he would be a chaplain's assistant, which is what he wanted to be, and he ended up being a Humvee mechanic. And the one thing his recruiter promised him was that even if there was a war, he would never see combat because he scored so high on the ASVAB test. Casey said, Mom, I will only be, if there is a war, I'll only be in war in a support role. Well, Casey was killed 5 days after he got to Iraq in combat. He didn't want to be in Iraq. He said over and over again, I don't want to go, but I have to go. He re-enlisted in August of 2003 because, as you well know, the Army has a stop-loss policy, and they told him he was going to have to go to Iraq anyway. And if he re-enlisted, he could get a bonus plus change his MOS, which is a specialty, when he got home from Iraq. He didn't want to go to Iraq. He was a good soldier, and he was an honorable man. He did volunteer for the mission that killed him because he was a brave and honorable man, serving for a commander-in-chief who would not go and fight in the war of his generation, who sent our kids and your husband to fight in a war based on lies. And God bless you and your family. And I hope that your husband doesn't come home the same way my son came home.
Last call for Cindy Sheehan, Dallas. Go ahead.
Yes. I'm calling from Dallas, and I admire her. I've got 2 kids and a husband that was in the service. And my kids, they're too old now to be in the service. I'm 73 years old. And but I just admire her for standing up for her son. Because if my kids had died in the service when they were in there, I have a daughter and a son that was in the service. One was in the Navy and one was in the Air Force. And I'm just so proud of my kids for doing what they did. But that don't mean that they wanted to go to war when George Bush shied away from it.
Right.
And I just like to say that much because I've never called in before.
Thank you so much for your kind comments. I see Texas turning around so much. Texas is very independent, and they're beginning to see George Bush and see through him, which really gives me a lot of heart and a lot of hope. And I'm so proud of Casey, but he lived his life that way, his whole life. And I would still be proud of him, and he would have been such a wonderful contributor to society. He would have been a great dad, and I would have loved to hold his children.
Cindy Sheehan has been our guest for the last 45 minutes. This is her book, Peace Mom, A Mother's Journey Through Heartache to Activism. Thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you for having me.